again in raggedy sports. It ain't about controversy, more like stating the facts. The difference is you hold your tongue and he tell you it's whack. Either you cackling, rolling up a blunt, or in your council, baking in the bacons, just like a brunt. In Kansas City, never be the same without Jay Whitty. The star fell off, simple and plain. So if you're scared of the truth, might want to stay on the porch. It's real talk, Jason Whitlock, Fox Sports, more than a talk show. All the topics is fire. Jay Whizzle, aka McNulty from New Orleans.
Welcome to Real Talk. I'm Jason Whitlock of FoxSports.com. You're listening to Real Talk on FoxSportsRadio.com. Thank you for joining me. All right, this man needs no long-winded introduction. He's Bob Costas, one of the premier broadcasters in the history of sports broadcasting, and certainly one of the premier broadcasters working today. Bob joins me on Real Talk. Bob, welcome.
Hey, Jason, what could possibly be mutually on our minds this week?
Oh, it's probably this Monday Night Football game. I really appreciate you coming on, and we're going to live broadcast and talk about the Giants and the Redskins.
All right. I'm not even watching the Giants and Redskins right now. Should I switch over so I know what I'm talking about?
That would help.
I'll get there. I'm going to be there in 2 seconds. Let's see.
All right, so Bob,
here we are. The Redskins appear to have the ball. That much I can see.
They do.
And here's a pitch out. It's a replay, however, of a play that seemed to have gone for not quite first down yardage.
The Redskins are off to they're down 3-0, but they've already dropped a couple of passes. So I picked the Redskins to win this game, so I'm not surprised that they'll probably lay an egg.
And Alfred Morris has gone past 1,000 yards rushing.
Oh.
And now they have 3 men in the backfield, plus the quarterback Griffin, who keeps it
off the
fake on the option, and then the ball pops loose into the hands of number 15, who carries it across for a touchdown. After Griffin had come up with a terrific gain off the left side, faking the option toss, as only he can do among NFL quarterbacks, then the ball is knocked loose by somebody. I'm not calling the game, at least not actually, so I don't have a depth chart in front of me, but somebody knocks it loose, and then number 15 picks it up, and the next thing you know, Washington has a touchdown.
I wonder if we're breaking FCC rules by... Oh, he pitched that.
But he pitched it. I just saw on the replay. He pitched. That was oh, my gosh.
He's going to be called down. That's coming back. He was down. That's coming.
No, you may be right, but still.
Great play.
Oh, no, it was knocked loose. It looked like he pitched it. You know what happened? When you see on the third angle, the ball was knocked loose, and as he tried to regain control of it, his arms moved upward and just kind of fortuitously batted it in the direction of a teammate, but it had been knocked loose as a fumble.
Great play. That will.
You know what? If somebody isn't actually watching this and they're just hearing us talk, they'll never watch another football game again.
All right, so Bob, we're both embroiled in a controversy surrounding Javon Belcher and our reaction to that tragedy. Mm-hmm. You had a very interesting Sunday night football commentary that about the Belcher tragedy and speaking about the issue of perhaps we need to have a conversation in this country about our gun policies. One of the interesting reactions I heard today were people speaking about the appropriateness, questioning the appropriateness of you addressing this topic on Sunday Night Football. Why did you do it, and do you think it was the right thing?
Yeah, I think that's an easy one. Had the incident not involved an NFL player, then no matter how important it may have been as a news item, then it would not have been appropriate to bring it in there. But that circumstance had been discussed in one way or another throughout the day on all the NFL programs and on our program. And we gave the entire halftime over to it, the first segment with Tony Dungy and Rodney Harrison and Dan Patrick. So the issue was definitely on the table. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a sports announcer occasionally, not all the time or even most of the time, but occasionally in a small segment, and these are small segments, addressing some of the issues that go beyond the field. Those issues do come up, or there are times when sports becomes intertwined with those issues. And I've always found this to be true. If someone disagrees with what you write, then they'll say that what you wrote was a screed. But someone who agrees with it thinks it's a thoughtful commentary. If they disagree with what you say on television, they term it a rant. But if they agree with it, well, it's just a commentary. I guarantee you that many of the gun lobby folks who were outraged by what I said, if I had come on and said, well, it was a tragedy in Kansas City, but let's not misunderstand, only people commit murders, guns do not, and et cetera, then they would have stood up and applauded me. And there wouldn't be anything about how inappropriate it was to interject politics, as they see it, into halftime. It depends upon whether they agree with you or not. Now, I don't have any problem with someone disagreeing with me based on the merits or their perceived lack of merits of my remarks. But to launch personal attacks or to say it's not appropriate to make these remarks, I don't pay any attention to that.
One of the questions I received on in a radio interview I did today on Monday was that someone said they were surprised that Bob Costas did this, and I was not, because when I think of Bob Costas and your brand, I think of a sports broadcaster and commentator who looks for opportunities to connect sports issues to broader, bigger social issues, to make sports relevant to the non-hardcore sports fans, or to use it as an opportunity to get hardcore sports fans to think about bigger issues. Am I wrong about that this seems consistent with Bob Costas' brand as a broadcaster?
I think you're more or less right. I'm not going out of my way looking for them or trying to force them in, but when they come up and when they seem pertinent, then I do it. An example is at the Olympics. There are many examples of terrorist tragedies in world history. There are examples of anti-Semitism all around. But one specific example of those two things connecting was the Munich tragedy of 1972. It was appropriate for me to address that, I felt, at the Olympics, and I thought if I didn't, no one else was going to, because it was the 40th anniversary of that particular event, and the IOC, for its own reasons, declined to acknowledge it at any official time during the Olympics. So it was appropriate for me to bring that up. If I had just from out of nowhere begun opining about the situation in the Middle East in the middle of a baseball game, that wouldn't make much sense, even if everything I said was insightful in some way. I would hope that people can make those distinctions. So when something seems to me to be pertinent and there seems to be an opportunity to say something worthwhile, then I'll do it. In retrospect, my only misgiving about what I did on Sunday night was that I kind of broke one of my own rules. And one of my own rules is when you have a tough or controversial subject, make sure you have enough time to make sure that your point of view is fully understood. And I had so little time there that I was only able to address the one aspect, and that's the gun culture aspect that you wrote about and I quoted you on. Some people wrongly inferred from that I was unaware that there is a domestic violence aspect to this, that there may in fact be a connection between football and the effects of football to this. Not only am I aware of those things, I've discussed those things at length before and will again. This time, though, I had such a limited period of time that I just focused on the one aspect which I thought you had addressed very effectively, and I quoted you. And that left me open maybe to some misunderstanding.
Have you reached a point in your career where, you knew that there would be some backlash to this commentary, and at the point in your career, it's worth it. If you have this place to speak to so many different people, what the hell's the use in having it if you don't state some opinions that are going to cause you some discomfort?
Yeah, I didn't have any problem with that. I knew that it would generate a reaction. And I also know that those who are passionate and angry are more likely, no matter what the issue is, be it and whether they come from the left or the right, those who are most passionate and most angry are most inclined to be heard. They have more energy for it. So the online reaction, whatever it is, isn't necessarily a consensus, and it doesn't reflect all of the support that I've received and the many people saying, gee, I'm glad somebody said that. But I knew that would be part of the mix. My only regret is that there wasn't more time. And as I thought about it, like tomorrow night we're taping a Costas Tonight that airs on Thursday. We have a full hour. I could address this subject on that show and spend 10 or 15 minutes on it and flesh it out more completely. On the other hand, that show is seen by just a tiny fraction of the people who see Sunday Night Football, and it would be a bit less timely because the Belcher situation had unfolded over that weekend. So I weighed the timeliness aspect and the size of the audience aspect, and I made a compromise, which was that I couldn't discuss the issue in full. I could just discuss the one aspect that you summed up in your column, and that's what I chose to do.
Did you have to clear the commentary with the higher-ups at NBC?
I make them aware of what I'm going to talk about, and I'm receptive to their input. Sometimes they'll say, well, what about this? They don't forbid me from saying anything, but they'll sometimes say, do you think that you should note this? Or might it be more effective if you do that? And sometimes I take their advice because they make a good point in my mind, and other times I respectfully say, no, I think I'm going to go with it this way. The only thing they ever ask for is that if it's potentially controversial, that they be given a heads up. And as you know, in television, sometimes you're working right to the wire. It's not like I'm sitting there with it done at noon. We didn't even know what we were going to do at halftime until after the pregame show ended and the game had kicked off. But I did give them a heads up a few minutes before I went on the air, and they were okay with it, and they're supportive now.
How about Roger Goodell in the NFL? Have you heard from them?
No,
they okay?
I haven't heard anything from them.
And you haven't heard about them contacting your bosses at NBC?
No, I haven't. And I would be very surprised if that happened in any sort of negative way. I'd be very surprised.
I hate that this is a terrible question, but I'm going to ask it. If you had to speculate, do you think Roger Goodell and the NFL cared one way or another?
Well, I certainly didn't indict the league in any way. All I had time to say, and I did put this in parenthetically, was in the days ahead, as you wrote, Belcher's actions will be analyzed, and along with their possible connection to football. I think that was how I paraphrased what you said, their possible connection to football. I was trying to indicate to the audience that I understood that there were at least potentially some football-related aspects to this, but we didn't have enough evidence and still don't to make that statement. We know that that's been true in other situations. We don't know all the particulars of Javon Belcher's situation. But aside from that one half sentence that indicated that there might be a potential link, I didn't say anything about the league in connection with this. So I wouldn't think that they would have any problem with it. Plus, in fairness to the NFL, they themselves, maybe not to the extent that some critics would like, but they themselves have recognized that there are problems with the violence of the league. There are problems with the toll the game takes on players. And they're taking steps. People have different opinions as to whether they're significant enough, but they're taking steps to try to reform the game.
Do you think, and again I'm asking you to speculate, do you think, and I know this wasn't part of your commentary, I'm just trying to give you an opportunity to talk about it. Do you think head injuries, concussions, just the violent nature of football played any role in what transpired with Belcher?
I can't say about this particular situation. That would be irresponsible. Every particular situation has its own dynamics. But in general, we know that at least some football players not only have had their bodies broken by the game, but have had their minds altered by the game, suffering from depression, from dementia, from reduced impulse control. They become different people. And it's also possible that the violent culture of the game affects some people, not all, I'm not even saying most, but affects some players in a way that turns them into different people off the field. Plus, you could also make the case that some of those who are inclined to play football are violent by nature. So the pool of players may include some people inclined toward violence to a greater degree than other athletes. So in a general way, I think that's always a legitimate question to ask, but it's not legitimate to jump to that conclusion in every particular case until you've got all the evidence about that case, and we have almost no evidence regarding Belcher other than the facts of the murder-suicide itself. We don't have enough facts about Belcher's life and about his medical condition and his relationship with his girlfriend. We don't have all that information yet, so I wouldn't jump to any conclusions.
Here's the way I think you could discuss it on your show in a broader way with more time that I'll offer up as a suggestion. And this doesn't have to be connected to Belcher, but football is obviously really in transition as we react to all this information about head injuries. And we just went through a scenario where Alex Smith is having a great season. He's winning football games. He suffers a head injury, admits to the symptoms, and loses his job as a result with the San Francisco 49ers. These young people, young 21 to 28-year-old kids, are under so much pressure, have a limited amount of time to make this massive amount of money, and we're baiting them into ignoring the symptoms, being dishonest about the symptoms, because there is a risk if you acknowledge these head injury symptoms. Look what's going on with Michael Vick. He just lost his job, and they're going with Nick Foles because he couldn't pass these concussion tests. And whether this affected Javon Belcher or not, but if he were somehow dealing with head injuries and in denial of them out of fear that this could cost him his NFL career, I just think there's more pressure on these young people to live in denial about what they're going through, be dishonest about it, and try to take care of it themselves. And perhaps they're putting themselves at more and more jeopardy. Football is just in a very precarious situation that it makes me sympathetic to Roger Goodell and what they're trying to do with safety, but it's also something we need to be talking about extensively and educating not just ourselves but the players that are actually playing the game and the fans to understand what these guys are really going through.
Yeah, I agree with that, and sometimes, and this is sometimes frustrating, when you talk about an issue and you only have time to talk about a single aspect, people will bring up other aspects that are legitimate parts of it as if they think you're not aware of them. Anyone who's paid attention to what I've said about these various issues knows that no network sports broadcaster has addressed the violent culture of the NFL, the after effects of an NFL career, domestic violence by professional athletes, the concussion issue, all those things. I've addressed those things repeatedly and often in high-profile places. And all of the questions that you raised are legitimate questions to ask any time a Javon Belcher-type situation comes up, although we certainly hope it doesn't again, but it might. Any time a situation like that comes up, they're legitimate questions to ask. But as I said before, in Belcher's case, we just don't have the answers yet. But the point you raise about players having an incentive to conceal injuries or downplay injuries because they're afraid they might lose their jobs, that's definitely true. Many players have said, Brian Urlacher recently among them, that if they could, they would hide a concussion and try to play on, partly because it's part of their warrior mentality and they don't want to let down their teammates, in some players' cases because they're afraid they'd lose their jobs, which is why the league has tried to take this out of the hands of the players and make sure that it's independent neurologists, not employed by the team, not even the team doctor, who's making the ultimate determination about whether a concussed player is good to go back into the game or good to return to action after whatever period of time.
Is football in trouble?
It seems like a crazy question on its face because its popularity is so overwhelming. It dwarfs the other sports in America. It seems that they can do no wrong. The television ratings go up. It's almost a license to print money. But beneath the surface, there are two significant problems. Not the things that sometimes capture our attention, like replacement officials or whatever. Those are passing issues. But the fundamental questions are the question of violence within the league, and will you have generations now of parents who will say, I like football, but knowing what I now know about the dangers of the game, I'm not going to let my son play football. Or you're going to have people who eventually begin to feel more and more ambivalent about watching football. That's a problem. And the other big problem is the game televises so well, and you can get the game in such appealing ways. The Red Zone channel, you can buy the league pass for the whole season and watch every game for a reasonable amount of money. You can be in the comfort of your own home. high-definition plasma screen TV, don't have to put up with absurd ticket prices and seat licenses, schlepping back and forth to the game, freezing your tail off in night games late in the season, maybe surrounded by louts spilling beer on your family and acting like fools. There's a lot of reasons why football is more appealing at home than it is in the stadium. And Goodell and a lot of the owners are aware of that. Jerry Jones has answered it by turning his stadium into simultaneously a stadium and a giant television studio. And they're trying more and more to make the fan experience more interactive, and so you have more of, the chance to see things on replay and whatnot while you're sitting in your seat. But that is an issue. Is this going to turn into a studio game, and are people going to be disinclined to spend money and go to the games? That's the second issue. The most important one is the fundamental issue of the game's violence, and is it just crazy to let people play football anymore?
Do you think they should have played that game on Sunday?
By the way, before anyone misinterprets that, when I say let people play football, I'm not calling for football to be outlawed. I mean, will a parent let their son play football?
Do you think it was appropriate to play that game on Sunday, having had the head coach and the defensive coordinator just 28 hours earlier witness their starting linebacker kill himself?
I know that you wrote that it wasn't appropriate. I didn't feel that way. I would have understood if the game had been canceled, if the Chiefs themselves had had a team meeting and they had said, we just cannot play. I think the Panthers would have understood that. The league would have understood it. It would, just from a practical standpoint, have been an easier decision to make because the game had no playoff implications, and they could have made it up some other time if they just wanted to recoup the revenue. But it would have had no impact on the postseason picture. But from everything I got coming out of Kansas City, as distraught as they were, the coaching staff and the players wanted to play. So I didn't have any problem with them going ahead.
What did you think about them hanging his jersey and helmet in his locker room before, during, and after the game? That's uncomfortable to me.
I agree. Sometimes people who are too close to a situation have a little bit of trouble gaining perspective on it in the immediate aftermath of a tragedy. So they felt as if they had lost a teammate, and that's how they viewed this situation. But what disturbed me was how much of the media, at least at the outset, at least in the first 18 to 24 hours, treated this as if it were a tragedy with two victims. No. There was one victim and one perpetrator. The man who committed suicide first committed a murder. And to have any kind of equivalency, two lives tragically lost, that didn't sit well with me. I'm not going to indict any particular person or any particular network, but I saw a couple of things on Saturday night where, after reporting the story, they went to commercial with the kind of somber music you usually hear in circumstances like this, and then the full-screen shot, Javon Belcher and his date of birth and date of death, as you would with anyone who had been killed or had tragically died. That struck me as inappropriate. But I can understand it a bit more coming from his teammates. I still think it was inappropriate, but I'm not harshly critical of them because they were in shock, probably.
On a much lighter note and just more of a positive note, and somewhat switching to topics, to me, Sunday Night Football, after, I don't know if the fifth or sixth year you guys have been the signature show for the NFL, but your studio show, everything has really settled into a good place. I think early on there was too much going on, and Oberman and Patrick, but it seems like the roles have settled in, and it's a very, very good show that deservedly is the signature show for the NFL. Talk about the evolution.
It was a hodgepodge at the beginning. Too many people, ill-defined roles, just didn't flow the way it should have. And I think where we turned the corner was they took me out of the studio and sent me to the stadium. So I went on the road. Now, this isn't about me, but it was about the chain reaction. By having me on the road, we have the only show which during the regular season comes from the site of the game as well as from the studio. So you get the feel of the anticipation and the game coming up. It allows me to do interviews with players and coaches the day before and have them be part of the broadcast. We've trimmed the studio in New York to where it's Dan, Tony, and Rodney. They have excellent chemistry. Unlike some of the other shows, they're not yelling and screaming at each other or forcing laughter. It's all natural, the way it flows. You get the occasional news updates from Peter King and Mike Florio, but it's a nice mix, and we're never in one place too long. And we also have an advantage the other shows don't have. The other shows are all talking about games upcoming, whereas we're able to review the entire day in football and then just look ahead to the one game that remains. So that gives us a different set of circumstances than the other shows have.
I think most people associate you more with baseball than football, but do you have a preference for one or the other?
Yeah, baseball is my favorite sport. I like all sports, and I like the drama and the stories involved in sports. But overall, baseball has always been my favorite, and I think it's the one I have the best feel for.
Huh. All right, well, I think, your story is so well known. Normally with these podcasts, I ask all kinds of background questions, but everybody knows Bob Costas.
Well, you know what? Let me jump back to something.
Yep.
Dealing with the Javon Belcher situation. And now, as I'll let it go. Something was distracting me on television, and isn't the Redskins and Giants, but I'll let it go. Anyway, you wrote on Sunday about Javon Belcher. You wrote about America's gun culture, and I think that while you and I have different viewpoints about the Second Amendment and about how far gun control should go, we overlap to some extent, but you go farther than I do, which is fine. When you spoke of a gun culture, I took that to mean not so much the NRA's position alone. I took that to mean your concern about the kind of Wild West atmosphere concerning guns that exists in the country, where even if you were talking about legal guns, people just take the use of guns, the carrying of guns, too cavalierly, too much for granted. There are too many people in this country leaving home carrying a gun as if it's the same thing as, well, don't forget my wallet, don't forget my watch, don't forget my gun. And more often than not, this leads to bad things, far more often than it leads to good things. I think you were critiquing, correct me if I'm wrong, that culture, that attitude toward guns, more than a specific position about the legality of guns.
I think guns have a place in our society that's completely inappropriate for young people. It's been defined, having a gun is the cool thing, the appropriate thing to have, and I'm talking about professional athletes. Too many of them are carrying guns, and they're reflective of this macho male society that's too pervasive throughout our country, and let's handle our own problems, and let's and I understand handling your own problems. That's what let's individually, vigilante justice is being celebrated, and so yes, it's a widespread, pervasive culture that affects us across economic, racial lines. The stand your ground mentality is across the board, and people may not even understand that the stand your ground mentality, that it's reflective of an overall cultural thing that we've been preached to, that somehow confrontation and taking the law into your own hand is a part of our individual liberty that we must defend, and it's the right macho male thing to do, and it's frightening. It's the main reason I don't own a gun, because I want to avoid confrontation at all costs. And so if someone's looking for a problem, I'm running the other way. Call me a coward, call me whatever, but that's not the pervasive mentality in America. And Javon Belcher and other young people, particularly these Plaxico Burress, all of these professional athletes that think somehow their safety is enhanced by having a gun, and their willingness to confront whatever problems they have, it's just wrong, and it scares the hell out of me.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to spark a conversation and some self-reflection about.
And that is what I got from your column, and what I was trying to get across in reading it virtually verbatim, at least the portions that I had time to read. I was quoting you. Certainly I agreed with you, but They were your words, and I took it to mean that you were concerned about this culture and this attitude toward guns, whether it comes from the inner city or whether it comes from somebody out in the hinterlands. There's an attitude. It may take different forms, but there's an attitude about guns in this country that more often leads to grief than to good things. Javon Belcher's gun was legal, from what we know now, was legally purchased. But I think it's foolish to believe that the culture's attitude toward guns doesn't play some role in tragedies like this. They don't happen in isolation. I ask this question rhetorically. Can you give me an example, one example, of a professional athlete, let's confine it to sports, a professional athlete who, by virtue of having a gun, was able to defuse a potentially deadly or violent situation, was able to disarm someone who would have done innocent people harm, was able to protect him or herself or their family from someone with a gun or another deadly weapon or deadly intent, where a good outcome came from this athlete having a gun. Give me one example of that, where something happened like in a movie. Here's the bad guy, but don't worry, I've got a gun. No one else will be hurt, and if I can, I'll disarm this guy by just shooting him in the leg, and he won't even be badly hurt. And everything will be fine, and everyone will say, wow, it was a good thing that Joe had a gun. Give me an example of that actually happening. I could give you dozens, if not hundreds of examples of tragedies ensuing because athletes were carrying guns where they didn't need to have guns at all.
Great point. I hate to give a flippant response that because it's inappropriate to joke at this time, but someone texted or emailed me or tweeted at me that at some point someone's going to argue that if Javon Belcher had had a second gun, he could have defended himself from killing himself. And I know that's an absurd, but that's almost like where we're at. When the shooting happened with the Batman Dark Knight whatever deal, people were arguing, oh my, if someone in the crowd had a gun.
Oh yeah, I've heard that repeatedly. Only more people in the theater
would have
had
died.
Guns.
Yeah,
well,
and that would have increased the death toll because there would have been.
Of course, it would have. Talk to any policeman or police chief about this. Virtually any, they would scoff at that notion.
Yes, I was, and that was the beauty of your commentary is these are conversations that average, ordinary Americans either try to avoid or don't have, and so that's why I was glad that NBC gave you the freedom to make the commentary, whether they agreed with it or not. And of course, there were going to be people across America that disagreed with it, but at least there's a conversation going on. And it was one of the main reasons, although I didn't say it specifically in my column, I wish the game had been canceled because I would like for athletes to think about what it is they're doing. And are they really helping themselves, arming themselves, or are they putting themselves in jeopardy? Because you are absolutely right. If there was an example of an athlete stopping himself from getting robbed or defending himself from him or a loved one getting killed, that would make major news. And they just don't have an example of that. But we have examples of just the opposite, and this here being the latest example.
Yeah, and look, even though Javon Belcher apparently owned his gun legally, and yes, theoretically, he's a big, strong guy, he could have killed the poor woman with his bare hands, or could have picked up an object, whatever it is. But we all know, let's be honest, we all know that the presence of a gun makes a crazy, impulsive decision like that not only more likely, but obviously more likely to be deadly. It's just common sense. Now, having said that, I just want to make this clear. You have your own point of view. I have mine. I was not calling for the repeal of the Second Amendment. I do think there should be sensible controls on firearms and on ammunition, and there should be tighter controls on who can acquire them and under what circumstances. But certainly I have no problem with a person having a gun in their home for the purposes of protection. I'm not a hunter myself and have no interest in it, but I understand that that's entrenched in America and there's no chance that that's going to be outlawed. I have no problem with that for that use. But guns have proliferated in this country in a way that cannot be justified, that have no connection to protection, self-protection, protection of your family, or what I think a reasonable person would conclude was the intent of the Second Amendment. And besides, when the Second Amendment was penned, no one, even the most far-sighted person, could have anticipated the changes in technology, the changes in weaponry, the changes in the dynamic of society. And a society has a right to evolve, to shape its laws in ways that respond to evolving realities. And I'm not so sure that our present gun laws do that well enough.
In conclusion, I just got to ask you a straight football question. You followed the entire NFL season. Who's the best team in the NFL?
Well, it's a tough one, but I guess you got the Houston Texans have a claim, and so do the Atlanta Falcons. But despite having only one loss, each of them has been threatened sometimes by only so-so teams. But I guess I'll go with Houston or Atlanta. But you know more about football than I do. That's a crazy thing maybe for me to say because of my position on Sunday Night Football. But I know my limitations on some of these things. I follow the game pretty closely, but I defer to some who know it better than I do, and I think you're one of those.
Well, you could say that about almost anybody. I know the game better. There's a few coaches, Belichick, that might know more about football than me.
Well, get him on the line then.
Hey, Bob, I really appreciate the time. Really appreciate you giving my column a bigger, broader platform. And as you stated eloquently, I know we don't agree on everything, but man, I really appreciate you paying attention to what I have to say.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you,
Have
Bob.
Have a good night.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, that's Bob Costas. Obviously, not just because I agree with him in this instance and am appreciative of him giving my column a bigger platform in life, but just I have a great deal of respect for Bob, a great deal of respect for his courage and willingness to say what he really thinks and to be outspoken and deal with the backlash and criticism that goes along with that. Appreciate him taking the time and joining us here on Real Talk. All right, I'm Jason Whitlock. Thanks for joining me.
Whitlock coming. Whitlock coming, y'all. Whitlock coming.
What they running for? Why they scared?
Palin running, Sharpton running, the NCAA.
Yeah, look at them little hypocritical sports writers running, and them dumbass millionaire athletes who want to be rap gangsters.
They scared, bro. They scared of that real talk. They can't handle the truth.
They missed the explanations.
Tell them about Jason Whitlock, real talk, and how Kansas City taught him to chop it up.
It's real talk. From the Poconos to the projects, it's real talk. Cause that's the object. With Jason Whitlock, you be quoting so-and-so. But once you tune in and give an ear, you already know. It's more than ball heads. It's more than baggy shorts. It's more than heck of the kids in raggedy sports. It ain't about controversy. More like stating the facts. The difference is you hold your tongue and he tell you it's whack. Either you cackling, rolling up a blunt, or in your council, faking in the vacants, just like a brunt. In Kansas City, never be the same without Jay Whitty. The star fell off, simple and plain. So if you're scared of the truth, might want to stay on the porch. It's real talk, Jason Whitlock, Fox Sports, more than a talk show. All the topics is fire. Jay Whizzle, aka McNulty from the wire.
Say what they won't say. No censorship, tell it like it is, club, lifetime membership. Witty with the wordplay, paid for his penmanship. It's overdue, so here's the tongue lashing that you finna get. Real talk.
So what you talking about? It's real talk.
Real talk.
So what you talking about? It's real talk.
Real talk.
And what they talking about? It's real talk.
Real talk.
And what they talking about? It's real talk.
Yo, it's time to re-up, son, meet me on the roof. Giving ghosts at the pick, lights out when I shoot. I call the plays like a point guard, doing my thing. Whether Cleveland or Miami,
me shit, the king stay king. In the meantime, between time, filling up vacants. Hands on my hip, chips stacked in the basement. Palms wet, sweat dripping off my forehead. Contract extension, if I score, I want more bread. But the D come first, so let's rally the troops. If they out of bounds, drop them like Chris and Snoop. Had to dash like they do the 100 meters. Exposed them all before the boss change. That's what buzzer beater. Real talk. Say what they won't say. No censorship, tell it like it is, club, lifetime membership. Witty with the wordplay, paid for his penmanship. It's overdue, so here's the tongue lashing that you finna get. Real talk.
So what you talking about? It's real talk.
Real talk.
So what you talking about? It's real talk.
Real talk.
And what they talking about? It's real talk.
Real talk.
And what they talking about? It's real talk.
Real talk. It's Kansas City's own. Scatterman and Snug Grill. Jason Whitlock. For Fox Sports. And if you didn't know, now you know. Now you know. It's real talk.